Hello, and welcome to today's web event, Serve Yourself, the Next Generation of Data Analytics, brought to you by Ziff Davis and Looker. I am Karen Bannon, and I'll be the moderator. We have just a few quick notes before we begin. Slides will advance automatically throughout our event. In addition, the console you're looking at is customizable. This means you can move and resize any of the windows you see open, as well as explore the widgets at the bottom of your screen. For example, you can check out the Resources tab, or you can find more information about today's sponsor. We'd like the event to be as interactive as possible, so at this time we invite you to ask any questions you may have using that question box on the left side of your screen. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can towards the end of the event. And finally, an on-demand presentation will be available after our event, and attendees will receive a link via email. Today, data-driven business is the new norm. With the information economy well underway, today's innovators are cleverly using data to steer every aspect of their business. To navigate that course, organizations need self-service environments that don't compromise the data governance needed to keep data and decisions accurate. This need to maintain a single source of truth that everyone can leverage has led to innovative new practices in analytics overall. During today's event, our expert will discuss this as she talks about the evolution of BI and how new technologies have paved the way for modern data platforms that can serve the data needs of an entire company. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our expert, Elena Rowell. Elena is a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Looker, a data analytics platform that helps companies get more value from their data. She specializes in helping organizations better understand how best-of-breed data products can advance their bottom line. And with that, let's get started. Elena, I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. I appreciate you taking the time out of, I'm sure, what are busy lives to learn a little bit more about the next generation of data analytics. Before we dive into the next generation, though, it's important to understand where we came from, what brought us to this point, and then how we can go forward from there. Looking back on the 1980s or so, we see what we call the first wave of BI. Now, in the 1980s, this was the first time people were really starting to get serious about data and the first time that they really had access to it. And the products that we saw were based off of a monolithic stack where you really bought one product to do everything. And at the basis of this product was a very expensive data warehouse. And people spent a huge amount of time and energy protecting that data warehouse. There were two primary concerns of those monitoring and those running this first wave of BI. The first, as I mentioned, was protecting that data warehouse. All of the first wave really grew around the idea that databases weren't built for analytics. They were built for transactions, they were built to update and delete, but they were not built to handle analytic workloads. And so the idea of letting business users directly access those databases was entirely unacceptable. So a huge amount of time was put into cubing or rolling up the data so as to make it accessible to the users. And that, of course, is the second goal. We buy these systems to give people access to data and to get access to our company's most important metrics. And so because these systems were so complex, there was a huge amount of effort that had to be put into creating and curating the data that came out of them. And there were two effects of that. The first, which is excellent, was that every number that came out of these systems was 100% correct. People had spent hours and hours curating these metrics and curating the systems underneath them so that you knew that if you were looking at a number, it was blessed by the analytics department. These systems could be used to report to the SEC, to report to board members. They were pixel perfect and highly trustworthy. The other effect of that, though, is that they were slow, and not just in the way that they processed data, but also in the way that people interacted with them. They were so complicated and so monolithic that users' ability to access data was incredibly limited. And so using a first wave BI tool, data didn't become something that people were really used to in their day-to-day lives. And when people tried to get it, what we saw is that data was very inaccessible. We like to think of this as a data bottleneck. To get a report, you had to go and ask an analyst, which in theory is fine. And you get your report, and maybe you have a dashboard that shows you your key metrics. But anytime anyone wanted to get that edited or see some different variation of that data, or maybe even just get it updated, it required you to go back to that analytics team. And while you had been looking at your dashboard, a queue had formed. And so this idea of the data bottleneck, or we even call it a data breadline, where you have the rich who have access to data, which are the executives, and then the poor who get stuck in the breadline waiting for analysts to give them the data that they need. And eventually what we saw is that people just stopped coming back. They stopped coming back to stand in line and didn't really ever engage with the data or become data-driven. However, it was enough data to give people a taste. And that taste was just enough to take advantage of the new technologies that were coming up. So over this time, we saw databases getting faster, but we also saw computers getting faster and have more processing power to the point where they could actually start to process the amount of data that they needed on the hard drive as opposed to in a database or in a server. And so this second wave, we start to saw the data coming out of these systems, out of these first wave systems, into a CSV extract that, we built a table and we created a report. And then another CSV went into that extract. And then at some point you had the rise of the cloud and you had these different data sources and all of these different creations that created this sort of Frankenstein chaotic data system. And so the effect was that people could now get the data that they wanted, but there was no governance. We see here that I could get an extract from my own system. Maybe I got something from the data team, but it was a month old, but it was better than nothing. And so while we had this notion of self-service, we completely lost the idea of governance. So people had access to the data, but it wasn't necessarily right. And because of this, no one could agree. This data chaos really stemmed from that disparate data. People were, even if they were working off the same extract, they were defining their metrics differently. How do you agree on the notion of a monthly active user if everybody is pulling it from different systems or defining an active user differently or working off of old data? It really did not engender a community of trust in either each other or in data. And so these meetings that we would have, which seemed to be around the idea of progress, how do we improve our monthly active users? How do we get more monthly active users? Would degenerate into arguments over whose numbers were right. So instead of being productive, it was, no, we have 12,000 monthly active users. No, I'm sorry, we only had 11,000. Oh, wait, we have 20,000. And the meeting would be spent, instead of being productive, arguing about those numbers and trying to figure out who was right and tracing that data back to those sources. So while we had self-service, we lost that governance. The great news is that while all of this was going on, there was a revolution under the hood, so to speak. So these databases that we've assumed are expensive and slow are starting to mature and advance. And we're coming into a world where databases today are fast and cheap. And in many cases, these databases today are cloud-based and even operated for you by someone else. We're living in a very different world. And it really started with the rise of MapReduce and Hadoop in the early 2000s. It accelerated with MPP databases like Vertica and Redshift that allowed people to operate them without needing a core set of engineers to just keep them standing up. We also, then things advanced even further today with things like BigQuery and Snowflake that really just open up the power of the cloud to people for databases. And these databases they've removed the heavy need, let me rephrase that, to protect the database. We're no longer driving databases into people's basements. These are cloud-based that scale and are flexible and can handle these different data types. But while we have this revolution under the hood, what we see is that there's a lot of companies that are still stuck in the second wave, which again is based off the idea that databases are slow and expensive. So what we see them doing is they're swapping out these databases that they have for one of these wonderful new databases. However, it kind of defeats the purpose. So data storage is cheaper, but people are still extracting the data to get the value out of it because the systems that they're using are fundamentally based on extracting data. They're architected for that. So as much as you can re-architect a tool to, change the foundation that you're built upon, these tools have adapted, but you really just cannot change what the truth was when you started your product. The great news is that a better way is possible. Given this change, we see that there are new products coming along that are actually architected based on this idea that you have this fast and cheap database at the core of your data strategy. So the idea is to take all these disparate data sources that you still have. In all honesty, everyone knows that data is expanding at a huge rate. There are more sources today than ever before, and you still need to look at all that data together. And that requires you move the data. But in addition to these great new databases, there are also vendors that are popping up that are trying to help at every stage of the data process to really start to tie these things together and help them all work together. So we partner with a number of companies that are actually it's fantastic what they're able to do because they've taken this very, very, very challenging ETL process and reduced it somewhat to a SaaS tool in a sense that can extract from these products and load it into the database. And because these databases are so much more powerful, the transformation of the roll-ups, the cubes that were required early on to be able to make that database run are no longer required. So this data lake, so to speak, can have all of your data in a somewhat less structured way, even semi-structured depending on what you're using. And then on top of that, once you have everything inside of it and everything together, you put a data platform on. And what this does is it allows you to take all of this disparate data and tie it together logically. So all of that hard work that was done in the first wave to create this governance is being passed through and done in this data platform. But it's such a modular experience that it's far more flexible, but you still get that governance. And then on top of that, people can now access it in the way that they want. So people can get their tables, they can get their dashboards, whatever it is that they need to understand the data is available for them from that data platform. So now instead of having people arguing over metrics in a meeting, even if people are getting it from different ways, maybe one person has it delivered to their inbox, another person has a dashboard, another person has someone sending them a daily report. If that's all being pulled from the data platform, then everybody knows that a monthly active user has to have come onto the site at least once and spent at least 5 minutes on the site to be qualified as an active user. And so that meeting that was previously spent arguing about the numbers is now able to be super productive in actually thinking about how we drive that conversation forward. So with the data platform, you get the best of both worlds because you get the standard and the governance that you got in that first wave. You get that trust back in data. You know that what you're pulling is accurate. And that ability to trust what you're seeing is so powerful. And it's coupled with the ability to actually get that data yourself. That notion of self-service and flexibility and being able to ask a second question of the data when you get it is hugely powerful. And so with these data platforms, the goal, and hopefully what some companies are starting to achieve, is that they're able to give every person the answers and insights that they need to succeed. And these are all based on this codified knowledge of the analyst that's been built into these platforms. So what does this start to look like in a company? There are 3 companies that I'm going to talk about today that we think are doing it incredibly well and are really starting to gain that value from the data platforms. So first off, we have King. King is a leading interactive entertainment company. It's developed over 200 titles, including, as some of you may know, a very well-known game called Candy Crush, as well as one called Farm Heroes and one called Pet Rescue. So what is King doing, or what was their problem? The problem that King was facing was twofold. First off, they had the issue of data chaos. As I mentioned, they have a number of different games which come from a number of different studios. And each studio would have their own BI tools. And so all the metrics that were being reported up to that central company would be different. So a monthly active user, for example, on Candy Crush versus Farm Heroes may be defined differently, so they couldn't get a unified view of really what was happening in those games. Additionally, they had a bottleneck issue because modifying queries that were required to unify that data was very challenging and had to be done by data scientists and took up a lot of very, very valuable data scientist time. So by implementing a data platform, they were able to resolve these issues, but also do much more than that. So first off, today their game development is more effective than ever. If you think about the data involved in someone playing Candy Crush, you see the levels that they get to, and you see the number of attempts it takes them to get there and how many hours they spend in the game trying to beat those levels. What you also see is that as people have to spend more time beating a level, they're more likely to actually fall off and stop using the game at all. So King was able to identify levels that were super problematic in this regard and make them easier so that people would continue to move through the game and they could keep that monthly active user up. Additionally, they were able to really streamline their processes. So data scientists spent a huge amount of time putting all the knowledge that they had, codifying that knowledge into their data platform. And because they were able to do that, they were able to give people self-service access to that accurate data and then go work on more important data science-related things. So the users at King have actually really, really taken a hold of their data platform to really drive data forward at the company. And so they were originally planning to only roll this out for the executive team and the data science team, but it became so popular that what they saw is that users started to create their own reports. And the reports that users built and also scheduled for themselves would have taken the data scientist team over a year to build themselves. Next up, we have Glossier, which is a direct-to-consumer skincare and makeup brand. Since launching in the US in 2014, the company has expanded to 5 additional countries beyond the United States and has secured over $80 million in funding. They're a huge brand and a very popular topic in the marketing world because of how well they took advantage of new technologies like Instagram. So at Glossier, however, their problem really revolved around the data bottleneck. Their analyst team spent most of their time fielding questions from their business users as opposed to being able to actually spend time doing analysis. And by installing a data platform, now the employees across the company are able to get their own data, and it's really caught on like wildfire with employees spending over 20,000 minutes every month in the product. And in addition to just, being able to get the numbers that you need to answer how many customers we have, they're also able to build a better business strategy off of that with this data. And so understanding things like the lifetime value of a customer for where they should put their marketing dollars. For example, if one channel brings in, higher value first purchases, but another channel has a longer tail and that causes people to buy more times, they now know that they need to invest in that second channel. They could also see the order of purchase history. So they can start to do things like correlation and see if someone bought if someone bought a lipstick, maybe they're now more inclined to buy an eyeshadow, and we should really market them that eyeshadow. Finally, they've also started to open some brick and mortar stores, like many direct-to-consumer brands, and they can see the regional buying trends of all of these different regions to identify where the best places are for them to open these brick and mortar stores. So one of the best anecdotes that I've heard from Glossier is actually around their merchandising team. So as an online makeup company, there are a lot of problems inherent in not being able to test out the product. So what they do is they have alerts that go off that when people return, or actually when people exchange products for a different tone, because what they're looking for is when people are exchanging potentially, let's say, a light tone for a darker tone, and this is happening over and over again with the same SKU, they know that the picture from the light tone and the dark tone aren't accurately reflecting what the customer is getting. And so they can go and they can reshoot that product to make sure that what they're exposing on their website is more accurate depiction, which will then lower those return rates and help them, make more money and help them also have happier customers. The last company I'm going to talk about here is Stack Overflow. As many of you probably know, they are the largest online developer community, and they have more than 50 million programmers visiting each month to learn, share knowledge about these technical topics. So their primary issue was around data chaos. With 50 million users on their website every month, they had a lot of different data sources about those different customers that were all stored in siloed solutions. This meant that data science teams had to spend endless hours trying to wrangle and get all this data together if they wanted to do anything with it. So not only did you have people reporting from these siloed solutions, you also had a data science team who wanted to use this data to make predictive insights and to put it into use in the data science practice, wasting their time trying to wrangle this data. And so with a data platform in place, what they saw is that they were able to identify the actions and the interactions that really drove people to come back and drove people to renew. And so leveraging this data, they were able to see a 100% increase in their membership renewal rates. Additionally, their non-technical data curious people could now go to the single source of truth and get what they needed in just a few minutes. And so they now had an accurate answer, far different from that data silo and the data chaos, from that solution that gave it to them much faster. And finally, they had this single platform that allowed the analysts to now go focus on strategy and go doing more impactful analysis rather than dealing with these ad hoc questions. So Stack Overflow actually uses their data platform to feed all of their data science programs. And so their team is now able to spend the hours that was spent massaging the data to get it ready. Now they're able to actually take that time and focus it on doing data science, which is a huge value both for the company and also for the mental happiness of the data scientists. So With these in mind, I'd like to hop into a demo of our product, Looker, to give you an idea of kind of what a data platform looks like in practice. All right, so hopefully everybody can see this. What we're looking at here is a dashboard. Looks very similar to any other BI tool that you've ever seen. This is a fake data set for an e-commerce company. And we can see that we're looking at our business pulse for the last 90 days. Now, all of this data is, sorry, one second. Okay. Now, hopefully you can see my screen. Sorry about that. Some technical difficulties on the webinar platform side. So, as I was saying, this is Looker. This is our fake e-commerce business. And we're looking at a business pulse, an overview of what's going on in the last 90 days. So as we scroll through here, we can, see what's happening, start to better understand by geography, look at some cohort analysis, really just get an overview of what's going on, which is great. And all of this is dynamic. It's all being pulled from our database, which means that it's as fresh as the data is. But the great part is that this is also all dynamic and all available for us to be able to dig into and really adjust it if we want. So here what we're looking at is this user demographic profile and where they came from. But if we want to dig into this, we can really start to dive into the data and explore it on our own. So now we have all of the fields available to us that we might want to look at instead of, let's say, gender. So if I go in here and I look up state, I can now see the state where this user is from. And what I can do is I can add this to my report and then create a filter. And maybe what I want to look at is California and let's say New York. I'm going to remove my gender and now just rerun this. So now what we can see is we basically have this exact same data set, but now we're looking at it on a state-by-state basis. And if we want to go in here, we can also say add Oregon and just rerun this, super easy. And now we're going to get a third donut. And this is all just me as a business user going in and playing with the data and trying to better understand this. And what's going on in the background is that this is issuing a SQL query to our very, very fast database underneath that allows me as a user to get this fresh data without having to go to an analyst. So the other piece of this is really starting to be able to take action on the data, because when it's fresh and when it's dynamic, you can have a much more interactive experience with it. So here's our same e-commerce store, and we're now looking at our dashboard for shipping logistics and starting to get an idea of how everything is being processed. We can look at any orders that are over 3 days old. These are maybe things that we want to take action on now, and start to look at what's happening over time, how our inventory is doing, what we're looking at. What I'm really interested in here, though, is that we have this order here that's very old that is still processing. So if I look at this, I can go in and I can show this one, and I can see what order this is. So it looks like this was an order for a men's Champions men's jersey pant. And this order is actually fairly old. If we can look, it was created on 11/26. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to find this user email, and I am going to send them an email because we value this customer and we want to make sure that they know that we know that it's been a little bit of a long time and we want to reward them for that. So maybe we add to this a little more message and then offer them this discount on their next purchase, and we can go and send that off. And right from here, we've now found someone who is waiting for an order and emailed them right away, which, increases engagement, all of these different things that give us that ability to start to interact with that data. And if you think about back to the monolithic BI world, the world of the first wave, where, data you had to go and wait in line for data if you couldn't even get it, versus this, where this is a dynamic conversation almost that we're having with the data. It's amazing how fast and how far the world of data has come and how bright the next generation looks. So with that, I am going to hand it back to Karen to moderate some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Elena. And as Elena mentioned, it is time for the Q&A portion of our event. So at this time, we'd like to invite you again to ask any questions you may have using that question box on the left side of your screen. And I've actually been watching as the questions have been coming in while Elena was speaking. So why don't we just jump right in. Let's see, with our first question here. So this one actually comes from Corey. Corey says, is there any way to use Locker to expose data to my customers?
Interesting. Yes, Corey, there is. So as a data platform, Looker has, what we like to say is we have 110% API access. And what that means is that anything that you can do from the Looker interface, you can do even more via the Looker API. And what this means is that you can not only do things like embed iframes within your product or within your internal portal, but you can also do things like power external websites with the data that's being pulled from Looker. And so if you wanted to create, let's say, we have customers that have, namely, for example, is a HR reporting and management tool. And within their product, they have analyses built in and baked in for their customers to look at on how their HR is going. And all of that data is coming from their Looker instance, which they're feeding into their product. So yes, that's 100% possible.
Okay, great. So David has a quick question. David would just like to know if Looker is on-prem or cloud-based.
Great question. It can be deployed either way, depending on what is of interest to you.
Okay. Let's see. Tet says, do you have higher ed institutions using Looker?
We do. We have a number of them. I don't have any off the top of my head. What I do know is that we have a number of companies that are actually leveraged by higher institutions that you've actually potentially using. I believe Handshake is one of them, and they're powering their insights in their product for higher education with Looker. But we do have a number of higher ed institutions. I just don't, off the top of my head, know what they are.
Okay. I'm sure we can follow up after the fact and get some more information, correct?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Perfect. So let's see. We have questions are flying in, actually. Let's grab this one from Preston. Preston says, what database technology do you typically see customers implement? And Preston adds the really fast databases, smiley face.
That's exactly right. So I think that our primary users, I would say the big three that we see are Redshift, Snowflake, and BigQuery. Those are the ones that are really popular right now. But we also have companies that are using Oracle. We have companies that are using, Presto or the Hive, using the, SQL abstraction layers on top of these Hadoop. We also have small companies that are using great transactional databases like Postgres and are using us on that. I think we support something crazy 60-some odd SQL dialects, which comes down to, I think, 30-something odd databases. So it runs the gamut.
Okay, we have another question here about, let's see. Wow, there's so many. Okay, so David says, can I create my own visualizations, for example, using D3 to create a custom visualization?
Yes, you can. So in actually our most recent big launch was Looker 6. And with that, we introduced the ability to easily add custom visualizations. We have a number that we've created ourselves that you can just install onto your instance. But it's also available for you to build your own using a library like D3 or just using any sort of custom JavaScript that you'd like. So 100%. We also have a number of great visualizations already baked into the product, but we definitely understand that people want to look at the data the way that makes the most sense for their company, and we may not cover that.
Great, thanks. So Addie actually has two questions. So the first question is, does Looker connect to the customer database, or are you migrating the data to the Looker database?
So we connect directly to the customer's database. We strongly believe that customers should own their own data. We do not want to ingest it. So there's that.
Okay, and Addie's second question was, I've read online that you are querying the data live. How do you handle performance while not affecting the customer database performance?
Very fair. There's a couple of things that go into that because we're definitely aware of the fact that people use their databases for things other than BI. First and foremost, I will say that Looker was founded because these databases are now far more, as I mentioned, far more powerful than they once were and can actually handle a huge amount of concurrency and a huge workload. With that said, we have a number of different ways to, kind of take the load off. We have something that we call persistence-derived tables, where you basically create custom tables and then you persist them in the database so that they don't have to rebuild every time. We also have a caching layer that can be used, that can be set for whatever works best for your company, so you can have it reset every 5 minutes. But we also have companies that will cache their very large tables at the beginning of the day and then refresh them every night. So to take that load off the database, there's a number of different ways to do it. Also with products like Snowflake that allow you to separate the storage and the compute capabilities, you can actually have different compute warehouses for different functions if that's something that you really need.
Okay, so we have a question here from Samir. So Samir says, you mentioned Looker has a modeling layer. How does that work? Sounds like it would take a long time to implement.
Very fair, Samir. So I would say yes and no. On the one hand, the modeling layer is so powerful, and it really allows you to bake all your analyst knowledge into the product. So while it does take more time to set up, it is far more valuable once you do. Additionally, we have, there are certain analyses and data sources that are very, very common across companies. And so we've created the notion of something called a block, which is basically pre-baked LookML, which is the language that our modeling layer is built upon. That kind of get you 80% of the way there with best of breed analyses so that then you can go and customize it on your own. So, and the other great part of it is that it's also, LookML is living and breathing. So as your company changes, it's how you define monthly active user changes from having to spend 5 minutes on the site to having to spend 7 minutes on the site. That's all defined in the LookML. And so it can be adjusted in a single place, and that will flow through to all reports that are leveraging that number. So in in just a few minutes, you can change everybody's report to reflect that new business metric.
Okay, thanks so much, Elena. Let's see, why don't we grab this one by Mark. So Mark says, could you speak to the stability of Looker as a company? If we were to use your API to make you part of our SaaS offering, how do we know that you'll be in business next year? How long has Looker been offering this product? So I know you can speak to that.
Great question. So fantastic timing even. Looker announced today that we raised our Series E funding, which is very exciting for us. So we are very well backed. We are very much a presence in the market. We have huge companies that are relying on us today. I think it's safe to say that we will be around in quite a few years. We have, very large enterprises that I'm not necessarily at leisure to tell you, but I think some of the ones, I guess, it was at a 1.6 billion valuation, and we're very excited about it. So I think we're set. We also have our leadership team at Looker is very well regarded and very conservative with how they're running our business. And so they very much are building us for a future where we can continue to support our customers.
Okay. Well, we're actually coming up to the quarter of the hour, so let me take one more question, and then we can let everyone go back to their day. So this is actually a really interesting question, and this comes from Susan. Susan says, what if your business changes? How do you change that in Looker?
Fantastic question. So as I mentioned with the LookML question, if those metrics change, it's all baked into LookML. And so, simple changes like monthly active user definition can be done with just changing a single metric. We also, though, really strongly believe in best-of-breed products. And so another way that people's business changes is maybe they change their CRM, or they change what they want to use for their, email provider or their marketing service, or they want to change their ETL and bring it in-house. That's all. We strongly believe in people doing what they want and what's best for their business. And so we're very flexible with all the way that our product runs. We support all these different databases if that's something that's changing with your company. But I would also add that the product is fully version controlled with Git. And so if anything does change and maybe it needs to change on a slower basis, or you need to revert something, that's all very possible in the product.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we just can't get to the rest of the questions. So for all the folks that did send us questions, we just don't have time to get to them, but we will make sure that anyone who asks a question will definitely get a follow-up offline. So Elena, thank you so much for your time today. Excellent presentation, and to all of our listeners for those great questions. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for our special webcast, Serve Yourself, the Next Generation of Data Analytics. I am Karen Bannon, and on behalf of Elena Rowell, Looker, and everyone at the Ziff Davis family of publications, thank you for your time and have a great day.